Right, so welcome to the Bearded and Broke podcast. This is the first episode. Basically, Dan and I decided to put this together as a way for us to discuss mainly sport. That's mainly what we're going to be talking about, but also we're going to talk about other things that interest us. So we've just recorded an episode on the Jeffrey Epstein documentary that's come out. We've also done stuff on The Last Dance. So it's basically whatever we find interesting and we think we want to talk about, and what we think you might be interested in listening to. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's get into it.
Right. So today's topic is going to be The Last Dance. Reason we've chosen that, Last Dance, Michael Jordan's athletic professional career. I think it does focus on the majority of his last professional year within basketball.
So the series basically, it starts out with his final professional year, but it keeps calling back throughout his life. So the first episode takes you through his childhood. Second episode, it's talking through the final season starting, and then calls back to, I think, when he was in high school and going into college and things like that. So that's how the series works. And you kind of see his development as the series goes, and also see that link back into how that also affected him in his final season, which I think was really cool. I really liked the way that they did that, where they start at the end and they kept calling back. I thought that was a really cool thing to have, rather than just following like a linear, boring progression, really.
I've got stuff to say about that, and I think that's because I think that's the only criticism I really had of that. I don't know if you want to call it a documentary, but of the series. So I think I'm just used to watching a season go through. So I've watched the Sunderland Till I Die, and I've watched the Man City All or Nothing, or whatever it's called on Amazon, and it showed the picture all throughout the season and how it went from the start in August all the way into May. And of course, there's ups and downs and whatnot, and you almost follow it through like that. Whereas with the Michael Jordan's one, it was a bit confusing because you had to stay so focused all throughout the whole time, because if you weren't, you would get confused what was happening and when it was happening, because it kept going backwards and forwards. However, saying that, I haven't really been in, a big fan of basketball up until I've just seen that. And seeing that, not even being a basketball fan, I can really appreciate what he did on the court. And I think that's incredible if you can get someone who's not a fan of the sport to be a fan of the sport after such amazing performances. That swept me off my feet.
Exactly. But the thing with the whole structure, I mean, did you really feel like you were missing any information at all? Because, I mean, were you ever confused at any point, really, whether you were actually missing something?
I think the only thing I would probably say about that is the detail into some of the, the betting stuff that he had, because I'm not a basketball man, and I wasn't around when he was, at his prime, or I was just born for some of it. So it's very difficult for someone like me to say what happened there. Or, was he actually addicted? Because it doesn't seem like he was, but it would have been nice to see it into a little bit more detail, because of course it touched quite a lot of the competitiveness of him and his attitude towards it, which I think is incredible. But the side of, the details of how those propagandas happen, because, I think I've mentioned to you before, when we're trying to plan this, you've got Ronaldo, you've got Messi, who've been done for tax evasion. You've got Michael Phelps, who's been done for, doing recreational drugs. And then you've got so many other elite athletes who've been caught doing something that's not the elite athlete mentality. But then with Michael Jordan, you don't really have it. They touched on the betting, the gambling, but it never really, went into it that far that he was actually a bad person.
Yeah.
Or human as such. I don't know how you want to word it.
That's a really good point you made at the end there. It's not very human. He's very uncomfortable with his imperfections and his flaws, and that's really irritating for me. He said after watching the series before it was released that he was really concerned that people may view him as the bad guy. So he's always been very keen to be liked and accepted by everybody. Like when you think about that, there was a bit in it where he had a really good opportunity to endorse some congressman who seemed to align with his views, and he didn't do that because he didn't want to stir the pot and he didn't want some people to dislike him. And that was really, really irritating for a lot of people, and I completely get that. You can just tell throughout that he was very keen to not be portrayed as having any negative aspects to him, and that really annoys me because it doesn't seem human. It just gives off this idea of him being this crazy, unattainable character when actually he has his own flaws. So the fact that he couldn't come to terms with his own flaws was really irritating, because we all have our own flaws and we all should be able to accept them. That's really healthy. And so the fact that he doesn't do that, and the fact that they don't press him a little bit more on those flaws, was really irritating for me.
Yeah, I think, like you said, I really like the point, in the political aspect of, endorsing one side and not the other, purely because, he in his own words, he said, because the Republicans buy shoes as well, or something like that.
Yes.
I found that incredible because, as an elite athlete nowadays anyway, not that they would go political, but I have huge respect for him for not going political and almost saying, I don't want to get involved. I just want to remain out of it. Don't want to be on one side and then almost affect my picture for the other side for people's beliefs. And I don't really see that nowadays, because you've got so much. You can make anything out of politics, can't you? Whether a player's being sponsored by a company from one country, and that's it. Another country who's in bad terms with that country, their people start saying, "Oh, well, he supports them," and that kind of thing. It becomes very complicated. Whereas he was that. Not that the American picture is the same nowadays, but I feel like, the American picture 20 years ago, where it was going there to make a dream, he was a black athlete, creating that picture of such a positive situation from a minority. I think that's incredible in what he did and how he's showed his own personality in that.
Yeah. But then coming back to the whole flaws thing, do you think the way he treated his teammates was acceptable?
See, I think there's a fine line with that, because I think as an elite athlete, you need a team in a team sport. You can't do it on your own. So I think he was very right to push his teammates to be more successful. And I don't think, not that they portrayed it in that series anyway, that any of the teammates had any mental issues going away from it. Everyone seemed to be very positive that they have been pushed by him. So I think had he gone any further and actually upset those people, his teammates, that would have been a problem. But he did it, again, as portrayed in that series. I don't know if that's how it actually was, but he did it to an extent where they knew that he pushed them to win and not to bully them for the sake of bullying them.
I mean, firstly, he did upset his teammates. He got into a literal fist fight with Steve Kerr. So he definitely upset people. And I'm certain that there would have been people in that team who maybe didn't go public, but who definitely would have been pissed off by his attitude. So he definitely upset people. So And
the question is, would they have been as successful if he didn't piss them off and push them?
That's true, because you need to be pushed at a certain point, and you need people to push you beyond what you think is capable, and that will definitely piss you off, because you think, oh, I'm already doing so well. Why do you need to keep pushing me to do even more? And it definitely feels like you're being targeted, like you're being bullied.
Yeah, and I think having that elite mentality is not very common. And where people are trying to be like, I am being pushed, this is my limit. It's almost having that psychological limit where people like Michael Jordan, the one and however many million trillion, come in and they say, well, no, it's not enough, and continue pushing. And it does create that discomfort. But also, like the quote, I don't know who said it, but hard times create strong men, or something along those lines. And where he has come in and made it.
Finish that quote. Hard times make strong men, good times make weak men make hard times. So it's like a cycle almost.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thanks for finishing that, because I couldn't.
Yeah. So basically, if he just let them, if he hadn't kept pushing them the whole time, you could assume that it would make a hard time, because they would then maybe lose a playoff game or lose in the finals. And so that for them would be considered a hard time, because they wouldn't win 6 championships.
Yeah, and I think it's very difficult to judge that, because they could have gone on to win more, had they had a proper management in the club, and not had a few guys who just wanted to make money, and only look to the future as such. When you've got something that's not broken, and I see it from a business point of view, but I think they went to the extreme with that point of view of saying, oh, well, they were worth too much money, and we couldn't afford their contracts. But then the owner in the last episode said that, not the owner, sorry, Michael Jordan said at the end, well, if they would have offered us a 1-year contract to prove that we can go in one more time and make it 7, I would have accepted it. And I'm sure that if he would have accepted it, then all the other teammates would have accepted it.
Yeah. I mean, Scottie Pippen would have been a bit of a challenge, because he'd been underpaid for so long. Like, he was like...
But he could have asked for so much money, though, couldn't he, after what they've done? For
sure. But then... because I have a really controversial opinion about Jerry Krause. I don't think Jerry Krause, based on what I saw, and I did a little bit of research after ending the series, I don't think Jerry Krause was that good of a general manager. I think he got very lucky drafting he didn't even draft Michael Jordan. It was somebody else who was in before him who drafted Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
And then obviously you got Scottie Pippen on a really, it's great for the team, not good for Scottie, the contract. So Scottie's on a shit contract, so okay, you can keep him. And then you pick up Dennis Rodman, who at the time I think he was considered a bit of a nutter, and he had won before, but he's one of those players, we see it all the time in football, where they're 50-50. They could go either way, really.
And I think with I wouldn't say it's a problem, because he was a great basketball player. He just didn't have the best of personalities, professional personalities, I think is the best wording for it, where he went missing from training and all that. But I think as a team, they were getting on a bit in '98, but they're still winning. So why does it matter?
And that's the thing that really irritates me. It's the fact that they couldn't let the team just go out of their own accord. They couldn't just say, okay, you've lost, so now we're going to break the team up. They won, and in that off season, Jordan retired. They got rid of Phil Jackson, their coach, released Dennis Rodman. Steve Kerr was
traded Pippen.
And traded Pippen. So they got rid of pretty much their entire starting 5.
Which is crazy.
But then you look at what Jerry Krause did after they got rid of everyone. They drafted that season. They ended up finishing bottom in the NBA. They had the worst record by far. There was a game where they struggled to put up 50 points in a game, which obviously I'm not a big basketball fan, but that's really, really bad. That's the equivalent to losing 4-0 in a football game. It's really, really bad.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that ever. And they did.
No.
They had the worst record overall, which meant that the following year, they had the first overall pick in the draft. So you get to pick anyone you want, anyone. Or you could trade that pick for some incredible talent right now. I think Kobe was in the league at that point. So you could have, like the Lakers would want to trade Kobe, but you could put something together where you could trade for a really good, talented player. And they didn't do that. They drafted somebody first overall who was decent, but he wasn't to Jordan's level. And they just have been mediocre ever since.
Unless you've got a Kobe Bryant, I don't think, even him, who's going to be a Michael Jordan's level? I mean, any sort of athlete.
Exactly.
You've got the Ronaldo, the Ronaldo, the Messis who've been around in elite football for 15 odd years. But you look at other sports. You've had Michael Phelps, of course, from again swimming background. He's got Usain Bolt that he did okay. He won in 3 Olympics, but then one medal was taken away from him.
Just all right. 300-meter champion. He's all right. He's bang average. I wouldn't consider him elite though.
I didn't say that. I think you're twisting my words. But
said it. You said it.
That I think I said he was all right. I didn't say he was average.
For me, they're basically the same thing. If he's all right, then he's basically average. It's not actually good. He got lucky.
Well, so if I call someone average, does that mean they're average? Or if I call someone average, does that mean they're shit?
Ooh, that means they're average. Which for an elite sprinter, you don't want to be average. You want to be elite. So he would be an average elite sprinter, whereas you want to be an elite sprinter.
Okay. So Usain Bolt was elite, right? But he had 9 medals, and one was taken away from him because one of his teammates was doping.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got him, but then you look at other sports, and I'm sure there's the Federers, the Djokovic's, which again they've been elite for so many years, and they've been performing at that level for so many years. But then you look at it, and then you think, what athlete has gone and retired to play in another sport, which he's almost made it in the major leagues in that sport as well, and then come back and then won another 3 championships in that sport that he started off with?
It's mad. I mean, if it wasn't for that lockout where the players were trying to negotiate for better conditions or whatever, they were saying that he definitely could have been a Major League Baseball player, which is so unbelievably bizarre. Like you would not see the transition at all, but very nearly pulled it off, which is just mad. Like what players have gone on to like do other sports after retiring from their main sport?
So the only ones, the major ones that I've found, they weren't that they have retired from the sport and then come back and then won again. They've literally came to their retirement in football. You've had Paolo Maldini, who was, insane for AC Milan for however many years. And then he retired when he was, really old, like 40, and went to play tennis. He made it as a pro tennis player, but I've never heard of him.
What did he do as a tennis player?
Sorry?
How well did he do as a tennis player?
I don't think he's done that well because I've never heard of him play tennis. So it might be something to look into.
I'm doing
but
it
then again,
now.
You've had Petacek.
I am the Jamie of this podcast. Pull that shit up, Jamie. All right.
Pull that shit up, James.
Exactly.
Maybe you should change your name to Jamie.
Maybe. Yeah, all we need to do now is to be having me, instead of looking up tennis players, is to have me looking up videos of monkeys And then when I pull up the video, you go, wow, that shit's crazy, man.
I mean, I'm gonna do that anyway.
Paolo
So
Maldini.
the other athletes that I can think of is Ivan Perisic, who of course is a big striker for Croatia. You know, he played for Bayern Munich and Inter Milan, all those biggish European teams. He went to play volleyball for Croatia, but again, I never heard of him being big. Petr Cech retired from football. Now he's working for Chelsea in an advisor role. He's playing for a local ice hockey team for their reserves or development team, whatever you want to call them. So no player has really reached a level in another sport that I know of that, you know, is the same as Michael Jordan, where, like you said, he had potential to reach the MLB.
Exactly. Like he was so close to being able to play professionally in 2 different sports, which I just find to be mad. So, Maldini. Oh, yeah, whatever. So he played in the ATP Challenger Tour event. Now the ATP is one of the global tennis tours, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, fuck. Top 50. Right, blah, 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 blah. I can't see how he actually did, which is so annoying. But, I mean, to be able to make it professional in 2 different sports, okay, he didn't win anything because he was in his 40s and he was physically fucked at that point. Still, really, really impressive.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where I think some athletes have enough of their own sport that they play for 20, 30 odd years. From most elite athletes, that even if you count elite as just the major league in the sport, most athletes really get fed up of the sport because that's all they do for the whole life. And when they get to 35, 40, whenever the sport allows them to, they just want to get out of it and have nothing to do with it. It's very minor when an athlete says, oh, I want to stay in it, I want to go do my coaching badges in it, I want to go into the media side of things. I think it's only a handful of players of
No, absolutely, you're right. I mean,
opportunity and actually do pursue that.
I mean, I'm trying to think. So there was Steve Redgrave, wasn't there, who was a rower for ages and ages and ages. And in '96 Olympics, after that, he retired and said that if I ever step into a rowing boat, like somebody shoot me or something like that, something mental.
Yeah.
And then he did end up coming back and winning again in the 2000 Olympics. Then, go on.
That sounds exactly like Michael Phelps in was it 2012, where he said, "Oh, well, this is going to be it, and I've had enough now. I've done so well." And then he took, something like 12, 16 months off swimming, and then he was like, "You know what? Swimming has been such a big part of my life, and as a former swimmer, you hate it, but you love it at the same time. There's no middle ground in it." So he ended up coming back, of course, and then having many medals at the Rio Olympics, 4 golds and 2 silvers or something like that, which, at the age of 30, some 31, 32 for a swimmer, that's like 40, 42, 45 for a footballer.
Exactly. Like it's insanely successful, especially when you consider the fact that before Rio, he was already the most successful Olympian of all time. So he didn't really need to do it. He didn't really need to prove anything, which is even madder to think about. Like, he just did it because fuck it.
Yeah. Do you think it's the lack of competitiveness that they've got once they retire and they almost have nothing to do?
Yeah, I think it's got something to do with the fact that they need, bear in mind, you being a professional athlete, you're putting everything into this one thing. And there isn't really anything like that, any other career like that. Like, most people will work during the day and they'll have hobbies outside of that and things like that. The only thing that I can think of was just before Kobe died. When he retired from basketball, he went into filmmaking. I don't know exactly what role he had as a filmmaker. Maybe it was a director or something. But he ended up winning an Oscar for a short film that he put together. And so that's an example where somebody was able to retire from professional sport and just put all of their energy, all of their focus into this one thing. And he did have other focuses as well. Like, I remember after Kobe died, people were saying some of his focuses were, the filmmaking and being a good father, basically, and making sure that his daughters were incredibly successful. Those were his two focuses. Even then, he still had a split focus. He wasn't focused on just one thing. He had a professional focus and he had a personal life focus. And in a sense, professional sports is a combination of the two, because you think about your diet and your body and everything. You can't just go about and eat whatever you want and still expect to perform at a high level. So what what was I trying to say? Basically, like,
I think
go on.
I think all you're just trying to say is that it's very difficult for them to adapt into a normal life, and quote unquote, where most of people, 99% of people live. They have a job where they work potentially 9 till 5 or shift work or whatever, but they come home. They've got their family. They'll go to a gym or sports club or whatever other hobby they'll have, and it's almost split and spread out on what they do. And I think quite a lot of athletes, from a personal standpoint of view as well, you come off that platform where all you do is you train and you train and you train, and then you've got so much spare time, and you think, what the hell do I do with it? And then you come off, and then you have a few months where you laze about, potentially you don't really do much, and you think, right, I can't continue doing this. And this is where the mental side of aspect comes into place, with a lot of elite sport people coming off their sport and saying, oh well, I've suffered with depression because life is just not the same afterwards. And loads of athletes go and drink themselves to depression, and then they go get fat and all that sort of stuff, where so many things build into it. But as a person, like, again, quote unquote, as a normal person, you don't really think about it. You just think, oh, I'll wake up at 7 o'clock, and then I will go and have breakfast, walk the dog, whatever it is, and then I'll go to work. So an elite athlete could potentially be training at 7 o'clock, already being up for a couple of hours, and that's their life. And it's a very different livelihood, because people are saying, oh, it's a job. Well, it's not. It's a livelihood where you're building it up for, elite athletes would have been training since they're little kids, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah. And that's where people can do a better job of advising elite athletes, because I know a very common reason why people may fall into depression after retiring from elite sport is potentially a fact that their whole social circle is within that sport. They wouldn't even need to be an elite professional player. If you think about guys and girls who are really good at one sport, and they go through sixth form and uni and everything, and they stick with that one social group, and then say they get an injury and they can no longer do said sports, that can be really catastrophic for them, because everyone they know is still able to do this one thing and they can't. And so that can be really, really challenging for those people. And so that's where it's really important to for people to encourage them to have an open mind growing up, to involve themselves in different social circles and have different interests outside of just this one thing. So that when they do, so that when the time comes, that they can no longer play that sport or whatever, then they've got something else to transition their interest to.
I think that's a very relevant point that you just made, because I think that kind of covered what I went through thinking about it. You know, I was growing up, and when I was younger, I wasn't very good at swimming. And, you know, when I started getting to about 15, 16, that GCSE level, I started putting a lot of effort into training, and I ended up going quite high level at swimming. But then all my focus, like we've just mentioned, has shifted away from school into the swimming pool, into the gym. And there I started only really having friends that, you know, swam, and that was my social group. I wasn't really going to parties from friends at school because I was at training on Friday nights, and then I had training on Saturday morning. It was almost impossible to make them. And then when I went into doing A levels, I struggled quite a bit because, of course, all my focus was already in the swimming pool. My exam results weren't doing as well. So I ended up mucking it up, and, you know, things didn't go well. And then I didn't have a social group at school. Ended up going to uni. And how did we meet? We met through swimming. That's the only real social aspect that I've got in my life through the sport that I've done when I was younger. And it is really sad thinking about it, because when I was growing up, I was never told to go and explore other avenues for when this is going to come. Because, you know, I was just pushed into it by my parents, and they said, well, you got to go swim, you got to go do that. And I kind of took it on the chin and went, all right, well, I've got to go do that. I never really thought of what's going to happen in, you know, 10, 15 years, however long it was until I quit. And I think it's a really, really big psychological point where kids who are pushed, and I don't think that, you know, kids who are 10 or so shouldn't be talked about that, because it's not a big thing for when you're that small. But when you get to about 16, you know, and so on, you do start treading that water of potentially going elite and potentially reaching to a level where you're not really at a place that you can't focus and putting your whole focus into it to succeed any further. And yeah, I think that really touched a big point on what you mentioned. So I think it's a really good point. And if anyone is listening to it that's, you know, at that age, just listen to James on that point, because I think that's a very good point and will stop you from having any social problems when you come to the, you know, 24, 23 like us.
So you have social problems, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm a bit retarded. No offense to anyone who's a bit special as well, of course, but we are all special.
We're all special in our own unique ways.
Exactly.
But that's where I'm really happy that my parents did what they did, because, yeah, I was involved in swimming, but I also played rugby. I also enjoyed going to the gym. I also, for a brief time, I tried learning the drums and then realized that I didn't really like that. I dabbled in lots of different things.
I thought you were going to say you were just shit at it so you can continue.
Well, it's like learning anything. Like, when you first do it, you just suck, and you just have to power through that.
Am I right or wrong to say that it's the coordination that you have to?
Yeah, for sure. Because, you know, you'll be like tapping the what's it called, the hi-hat with one hand, and then your right foot will not necessarily be going. Everything will be going on different beats, and that's just on a really basic 4/4 beat. So 1, 2, 3, 4, just like that. Just to maintain, that's quite a simple version, but then you break down derivatives of that, and it quickly gets faster and gets a lot harder, like with anything. But when learning a new skill, you have to get through that initial, I think it's between 1 to 3 months of just being shit, of just being crap, and then eventually it starts to click, and then you can start to progress.
Yeah, I don't know who came up with this theory, but on a graph, if you look at performance and time, the graph almost has like an S curve. So where you're saying for 3 months, typically it could be, you know, it could be a year, it could be 2 years, it could be 1 week, where you're not really improving. and then you hit the knack on something. It's just like when you're learning to drive. I think is the easiest way to describe it for most people. When you're learning to drive, you first sit around the wheel and you're like, crap, this thing's moving. What do I do? Because I remember when I was like that, and I was like, it's moving and I'm in control. What is happening? I just need to hit the brakes. But then you get to a point and then something just clicks like that, and then you know what's happening, and you improve, and then suddenly things start catching with you, and you're improving. And don't get me wrong, it's probably not like that in majority of sports, because the majority of sports are not just a click of a finger. But in the driving sense, when you get the knack of things, you just start learning and you catch everything, and then all of a sudden you can drive a car.
Exactly. But then the difference you could draw between learning to drive and fucking playing sport is there's no real external variables. Obviously, you have to watch for other cars and things, but like you don't have to worry about being hit in the face necessarily when you're driving a car, unless you're really bad that your instructor just gets sick of you. This fucking kid is learning.
Is that talking from experience? That your driver just went, oh fuck this.
That's definitely how it felt when I went out with my dad a couple of times, and my mum as well. Oh my god.
It just reminds me of those videos where that really, I don't remember who it was, but it's just a really big fat guy sitting there, and he's driving on purposely really shit. I don't know if it's on purpose. He might just be really shit. But his dad just sits there and he just screams at the wheel. He's like, I don't know what's happening. And his dad's having like a heart attack next to him.
I remember seeing a video of a woman who'd failed her driving test, like her practical test, like 20 something times.
What?
And she's on the motorway. No, she's on the dual carriageway because she's still a learner and she can't go on the motorway yet. She's going to pull into the outside lane to overtake someone. Doesn't look, and there's just a car coming up behind her, and the guy had to grab the wheel and be like, "No, don't fucking do that." 20 times. She's in her 40s. I had to learn. I learned when I was 17, 18. How can you not get it now? How?
Yeah, I wouldn't know that problem because not to brag, but I passed first time. But I've got friends who've taken, I think, 8 or 10 tests or something like that for them to pass.
Practical.
So yeah. I'm not going to mention their names, but
you can tell me off.
Yeah. Yeah, it's embarrassing, and it's like they, again, bringing it back to the sport aspect of things, where, you know, an elite athlete as such and a normal person, a quote unquote, would have massively different mentalities, where, you know, an elite athlete like Michael Jordan, you know, I've just come off watching this and I think I'm just fresh, that's why I keep referring back to him, where he, you know, he said on one of the scenes, tell me if I'm wrong, but he made himself think that one guy from an opposition team told him something when that guy never said anything to him when they lost. And I found that incredible because that he found a way to motivate himself to go and win the next game in that series.
Yeah, he would fabricate stories that were negatively aimed towards him. And he would use those stories, whether they're real or not, and he would use them to motivate himself to. Because the way he motivates himself is quite similar to me, in that if I feel slighted by somebody, if I feel really, really pissed off that somebody doesn't believe in me, or if somebody says, James, you can't do this, you're shit, that motivates me even more to go out and prove them wrong. I'm really motivated by proving people wrong rather than just the individual success. So if you want to motivate me to do something, tell me I'm shit, and then I'll go away and I'll fucking hammer on that for ages.
I think that there's very many different techniques, and I think you're very rightly to say that, you know, a motivational technique for you would would push you a little bit further. But I think if I approached you,
just to be clear, like that technique may not necessarily work for everyone. Like somebody might find themselves becoming incredibly depressed. I don't know. They might end up becoming maybe a bit depressed off the back of that. But that's what I find works for me. And you'll have a different way of motivating yourself.
Absolutely. And I think with what you're saying, if I told you that you're shit at something, I don't think you would be like, oh, well, I'm going to go prove him wrong or something like that. You'll almost have that self-doubt in yourself where you'll say, oh, well, am I? And then I'm assuming, don't get me wrong, you might think otherwise, but you would have that self-doubt in yourself thinking, oh, well, am I shit? And then you start having that fire inside of you, start churning where you're starting to think, well, actually, I'm going to go say that I'm not shit. And you think, well, actually, I'll just go prove it. And you try harder and harder and harder. And then you come back at me and then that's it. You show me who's actually shit.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analysis, actually. Psychoanalysis. I didn't think we'd get to this point.
No, and I think I really like where, how we've discussed in this podcast, not that we're finishing now, of course, but it's turned into a very psychologically sport podcast where I think to why I've really enjoyed that series on Netflix on Michael Jordan is because how he stands out in his attitude and his motivational aspects where, technically he's just an average human being, but because he's got that attitude for motivation to improve, he's gone and pushed himself to a level where no other humans push themselves to.
Absolutely. And I think that was probably the defining characteristic difference between Michael Jordan and a lot of the other elite sports stars across any sport that you can really think of. I'm just trying to think about a comparison to draw. So here's one. So you've obviously got, because this has now made me a bit of a fan of basketball. So I was diving deep on like some similar stars, and the most recent basketball star that you can think of is LeBron James. And LeBron in 2011, I want to say, he was in the NBA Finals, played for Cleveland, I think, playing against Dallas, and they took I think they had a 2-1 lead in the series, and he just couldn't close it. He couldn't do it, and that was a big thing for a while before that. I think I'm right in that LeBron just was known at the time for just not being able to close out championships. Whereas, but then he's also an incredibly talented basketball player. He's since won a handful of championships, I think. But he could never take the ball and will his team to win. Whereas when you compare that to Michael Jordan, he was just able to do that. Like it was just intrinsic within him.
Yeah, and I think I couldn't comment on anything except that I know that LeBron played for Cleveland. But I think from a football standpoint of view, where I'm a big fan of it, it's the same with if you compare it, you try and bring in similarities. Where you bring in Ronaldo, he's gone with Real Madrid in 3 back-to-back Champions Leagues. Be it, they've had everything go for them in those 3 years. But you need a bit of luck in it. And it's the aspect that he was able to go and put that team forward. Because without him, where were they last year when Liverpool won it? When he went to Juventus, Real Madrid, they had a very similar team and they couldn't do it because he wasn't there.
How did Real do without Ronaldo? Where did they get to in the Champions League?
Well, they got knocked out by Ajax. It was either quarters or semis, I think. It was quarters because semis Ajax knocked out Spurs, didn't they?
No, Spurs knocked out Ajax to make the final, surely.
That's it. That's what I meant at the semis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they weren't even able to get... I mean, getting to the quarters is still fairly impressive, but when you consider they they won it the year before, didn't they?
Well, they won it 3 consecutive years before.
Exactly. I think that kind of proves your point. And also, you look at Ronaldo's track record long before that. 2008, wasn't that the year he won the Champions League with United as well? And you think about all the Premier League success associated with that. I know that it's painful for you as a Chelsea fan, because that was when John Terry fucked it up for you, but still.
I was going to say it's the luckiest Champions League anyone's won, but yeah, that was the last time that he's won it. And no. We're getting a year missed there, because I think he's won 4 with Real Madrid, 3 in a row where it was 2016, 17, 18, and then they won one in 2014, I believe. So that would have been before his first Champions League would have been 2008 with Man United.
Yeah, I remember now that 2014 team, wasn't that with, it was him, Gareth Bale, and Benzema?
Yeah, I mean, this is another thing that I think we need to go on a tangent on another podcast and not this one. But Gareth Bale's just being disrespected absolutely by Real Madrid. And, he's been there, won 4 Champions Leagues, and yeah.
Well, they didn't play him.
Hey?
They didn't play him at all last year, did they?
No, what, in the final?
No, I mean Gareth Bale. He barely played for Real last year.
Yeah, he's had his injury problems there, so I don't know. It's all the sheep herding and all that stuff in Wales. So it's a tough life.
I think that's a good point to end it on. If you've got to this point, thank you for listening or watching our incredibly awkward.
Cheers.
Yeah.
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 See you in the next one.
Yeah. Cheers, guys.